What's up guys, this is Ali. In today's episode I'm going to be telling you the top 5 gardening myths that you are going to encounter when growing plants. Gardening is going to be one of the hardest things that you will do in your life. Not because growing plants in itself it's hard, but because of all the misinformation and the myths you find out there online. So let's get started. Gardening myth number 1, it's going to be overwatering. A lot of people are so afraid to water their plants that most plants in the world die from lack of water rather than overwatering. Let me explain. How long do you think plants take to die from overwatering? A few hours, a few days, weeks, months, years? Well, in my personal experience from growing thousands and thousands of plants over the years, I can tell you it depends on the ambient temperatures around the plant. During the growing season, when the plants are actively growing and it's hot, it's going to take months and months before you even see any overwatering issues. And usually you do not see overwatering issues until winter time, from the plants being wet that entire year. As you can see right here, I got some Barbados cherry trees, I got some Suriname cherry trees, and these guys are in a flat tray. This flat tray stays full of water 24/7. These plants are wet right now 24/7. Why is that? Because there's no possible way for me to water them by hand. I have so many of them in these little containers that it's just not possible to water them by hand. Also, I don't have an overhead irrigation system in this area to overhead water them, so the easiest way for me to water these small plants is to use flood trays like this. And as you can see, I need to fill this one up because if I don't, my plants are going to die. Like this jaboticaba right here. This plant went dry, I think like 2 hours in the shade. You see, I have the shade structure right here, and look how ugly it looks. And this canopy right here, it's going to take 1 year to recover simply because it went dry in 2 hours in the heat. So my take on this is water your plants. Do not be afraid to water your plants. Right now in my area, the main killer of plants is lack of water. Plants in my area will die in a matter of hours in full sun if they go dry. That's how quickly they will die. From overwatering, it will take months to even over a year. So which one would you rather do? Not water your plants and kill them in a matter of hours, or keeping them wet and killing them in months or over a year? Another thing to keep in mind about overwatering issues is your plants are not going to die overnight. If you keep your plants wet for a week, 2 weeks, even 3 weeks, it rained, you water while it was raining, your plants are not going to die. It takes a long time for plants to show overwatering issues. And usually, once you start seeing overwatering issues, they are very subtle. Yellowing leaves, a few leaves at once, and then eventually the entire canopy. And then eventually, obviously, the root system is going to rot away. And then the root system supporting the canopy of your plant is going to die. And by the root system dying, well, guess what's going to happen to the canopy? It's going to die too. That process takes a long time to happen. It does not happen in a few hours, even a few days, not even in a few weeks. So do not be afraid to water. Do not listen to all these people telling you you're overwatering your plants, because that's what's actually killing your plants, you not watering. And that brings us to the next gardening myth, and that is soil amendments. A lot of people think that you need special soils in order to plant your trees in the ground. And if you don't use a specific soil meant for your plant, as soon as you put your plant in the ground, your plant is going to die or it's not going to do well. Well, I can tell you that it's a lie. And anybody telling you you need specific soils, they do not know anything about growing plants, or they think they do. And I have proof. You see my soil right here? It is rock hard. This is hard clay right here. I cannot dig it. It requires me to use a pickaxe to dig the soil right here. But yet, I have everything growing in this soil. From mango trees, bamboo, perfume trees, also known as champaca or Michela alba, more mango trees, bananas, look, flowering bananas, fruits, guava plants, Barbados cherry, day palm, persimmon, fig trees, all the citrus, more bamboo plants, java plum, mulberry trees, pitomba, Look, getting ready to flower. Pitomba growing in the freaking desert. A native hard clay soil. Look, you haven't seen this one before. Longan. My longas are ripening. Growing in native desert soil. I got star fruit over there. I have tons of trees growing in my native desert soil, hard clay soil, and I have no issues. I do not use soil amendments. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you, when I first started, I bought into buying soil amendments, buying specific soils and everything else online, and I was spending about $70 to $80 per hole when I planted trees at the beginning. And guess what? Those trees don't look any different than any other trees that I just showed you. One thing I can tell you is you do not need special soils when planting in the ground. My soil here in the desert technically is one of the worst soils in the US. If you live in an area that gets more rainfall than I do here in the desert, your soil, it's automatically going to be better than what I have here. And that's going to be most of you guys. So if I can grow my fruit trees, tropical fruit trees that are not meant to live here in the harsh environment in the desert, well, guess what? If I can do it, so can you. When planting trees in the ground, the only thing that I recommend people to do is to check for drainage. If the hole you're planting your tree in drains the water within 24 hours, that's all you need. Your plant will grow. Water is life. Water will amend your soil. Water will keep the living organisms in the soil alive, and they are the ones that will actually enrich your soil. And that is not something that you can buy from the store. All right, and that brings us to gardening myth number 3, and that is going to be transplant shock. Yes, when you take a little plant and put it into a bigger container, and then the plant looks ugly, like this guy's right here, or like this citrus right here, it's a plant's fault, right? Because they went to transplant shock. Because that is something normal, an excuse that people use when they kill their plants, when they actually go from a smaller container into a bigger container. It is the plant's fault, it is not your fault. Well, check this out. It is your fault. You're the reason why these plants look like this. Well, actually not you, my fault. Now, I have a guy new to the nursery. You know, he was potting trees he's done it before, but I guess, I don't know, he wasn't paying attention. So, he was taking tree pots, citrus, in these containers right here, and then putting them into bigger containers because, well, they needed to be potted. They were drying out way too quickly, and, well, that's when you know when you need to pot your plants. But the problem that he did, the mistake he made, he was pulling the trees from the trunk out of the container, completely ripping the roots out. And guess what happens when you damage the root system of your plants? They are going to look like this because you're ripping off the medium plants use to drink water. If they have no roots, most plants will not be able to absorb enough water to sustain themselves. So what usually happens is the canopy will dry up like this. Is this transplant shock? I guess you can call it that, but this is not natural. This is not normal. This was human error. So if you ever take a plant from a container and you put it into a different container and your plant looks like this, you are not careful. You damage the root system of your plant either in 2 ways, physical or chemical. Physical, you damage the root system. Something eats the root system. You stomp on the plant when you move it around from a smaller container to another container. Or chemical, you put too much fertilizer in there, herbicides, pesticides, it will have the same effect. If you're gonna learn more about transplant shock, I have a video where I talk about that in details. But this is human error, this is not normal, and this is not an excuse for you to kill your plants. Citrus in general are not root sensitive. If you take a citrus out of the container and you put it in another container and you water that plant and you didn't damage the roots, you're not gonna have this. Transplant shock, in my opinion, is not normal in the gardening world. Meaning a lot of plants are not actually root sensitive. Very few plants in my nursery I have encountered that are root sensitive, meaning the roots are so delicate, so tiny, that it's very hard not to damage them when you move them from one container to another. One of those plants is papaya. Papaya plants have very shallow fibrous roots. When you take them out of the containers, especially when they're not fully rooted, you will break the root system, and just breaking a few roots will cause a plant to wilt. Is that something you can prevent? Yes, but it's very difficult because these plants right here, they actually have a sensitive root system compared to most of the plants that I have here at the nursery. Transplant shock here at the nursery, it's not normal. It doesn't happen very often. I don't remember last time I had plants look like that after putting them in bigger containers. But I was not paying attention to see what the guy was doing when he was, potting them. So that is my fault for not supervising him, for not teaching him the right way. But after I noticed what he did, the other plants that he put in bigger containers, he was more careful. And as you can see, they look just fine. No transplant shock right here. This is the last batch that he did. And you can see the citrus look fine over here compared to those over there. Gardening myth number 4, and that is going to be bigger is better. When you go to a nursery, they always want to sell you the biggest trees they have because magically they're stronger, they will live longer, they will not suffer from transplant shock, and usually you're going to have an easier time buying a bigger plant, right? Well, check this out. That is a lie, and that's just a way for nurseries to take your money because bigger plants sell for a lot more money than a smaller plant. Most nurseries out there just want your money. They don't care about your plants. They don't care about anything but your wallet. Well, I don't do that here, guys. Here, I will tell you the truth. You make up your own mind, and at the end of the day, if you make the wrong choices, you had the right information to make that choice. Let me give you an example. So this one right here, this is a Mexican guava right here, right? This is a 1 gallon plant right here. This right now is $34.99, right? But I also have bigger guavas right here, same variety, in a bigger container, and these guys right here are $44.99. Is this bigger one here stronger than the smaller one? Will it last longer? Will it survive longer without water? And the answer is no. This big one right here will die just as fast as the little one if you don't water it. 1 to 2 hours going dry in full sun in my area, that guava plant there is completely destroyed. So buying bigger, it's not better in this case. In my opinion, you always want to buy the smallest ones you can find for this next reason, because they grow fast. You see this Pakistan mulberries right here? I have some massive ones right here, and they're probably like 10 to 15 feet tall, and I have them in 15 gallon or 25 gallon containers. These massive ones right here, I sell them for 150 bucks, right? But then I also have the smaller ones right here in these containers in 5 gallons, and these guys are $59.99. So is that bigger one over there better than the smaller one? No, it's not. Mulberry trees, they grow so fast that it makes no sense buying a bigger one. The only thing that you get with buying a bigger one is just you start with a big tree. So I guess you got bragging rights. So if you need something to look big immediately because you have an event coming up, then I guess buying big makes sense. But no, otherwise, it does not make a difference whether you buy a smaller one or a bigger one. Either plant is going to take a year in my area to fully root itself before it starts growing. And these little guys right here, within a year and a half to 2 years, will look just as big as those big ones over there. And those big ones over there will take easily a year to year and a half to fully root themselves in the ground before they even start growing. So by the time those guys start growing, these guys right here are gonna be about the same size to even bigger in the ground. So the only time that it makes sense buying a bigger plant in a bigger container, obviously, is when you have a slow growing plants, rare plants that take way too long to actually grow. That will be the only time that it makes sense buying a bigger container, like this variegated bay rum right here. This plant is extremely rare. I'm the only one that has this plant in my area. But these plants right here are in 25 gallon containers. This plant right here, they grow extremely slow in my area. So if you are a collector and you're looking for this specific plant and you have the money to spend, Well, yeah, go ahead and buy a bigger one. But keep in mind, the only thing you're doing is just starting with a bigger plant so you have bragging rights. This plant right here is not stronger, it's not gonna live longer, it's not gonna take the sun, it's not gonna take the cold better than a smaller plant just because it's bigger. One thing I wanna make clear is time starts in the ground. It does not start in the container. So it doesn't matter if you buy a million-year-old tree in a container. Once you put it in the ground, it's year zero. It's not year 1 million. That's the main mistake a lot of people make out there. And that's the reason why when you put your trees in the ground, they take a long time to grow, they take a long time to fruit, like for instance, date palms, because time starts in the ground. It's all about the root system in the ground. It's not about in the containers. Like this jamun or java plum right here. In my area, they take about an average of 5 years to actually bear fruit. 5 years. But just because I have this plant in this container for 5 years, it doesn't mean you're gonna start getting fruits immediately. Even if this plant right here was 5 years old and you put it in the ground, guess what? Plant time starts in the ground, so you're still gonna be waiting another 5 years before you see fruits. And that is true for most plants out there. But you're not gonna hear that from most nurseries because guess what? Money talks. And like I said, money clouds judgment and keeps people from being honest. And that brings us to the next gardening myth, and that is going to be deep watering. I would say this is the number one reason people kill plants in my area right now in the summer, and that is deep watering. Now, is deep watering itself killing plants, or is it the misinformation people do not have? Or is it people do not have the right information to water the plants? Let me explain. So let's say you bought this olive tree right here, right? This is a 4-inch container, and then you put it in the ground, and then you deep water. You put your hose there and you water for hours, right? And then you don't water for the next 2 to 3 days because you deep water your plant, right? For hours. Millions of gallons of water in the soil. The soil is soaking wet. But yet, this plant is still going to die. Why? Well, let me explain. You see, the roots are in this container right now. This container right now, I'm actually watering it through a flat tray because they're drying out so fast. If I put this plant in the ground, let's say I dig a hole right here, and I even built the berm around it to hold the water in there, and I deep water it. This plant right here in the sun still going to die, even with the soil around it being wet. You know why? Because this plant does not have any roots in that soil to drink that water. And it will not be able to drink that water in that soil until this plant actually has roots in the ground. In my area, this olive tree will take about a year before it roots itself in the ground to the point where it will be able to benefit from the water around the root ball. Until then, no amount of deep water in this area right here is going to water this little root ball, and this plant is going to die. And that is how people kill plants in my area from deep watering. You have to understand, your plant will not be able to drink that water in the soil until it's fully rooted in the ground. My recommendation for you is, if you're planting trees right now in the summer, which is prime planting time right now because plants grow when it's hot at night, good time to plant. You have to make sure you water around the root ball. If this is a plant that you're putting in the ground, you're gonna water right here. You gotta make sure this is wet. Most likely every single day, especially in hot areas. And deep water will not help you until your plant is older. In cooler climates, where it rains, you get clouds in the sky. I don't get clouds here hardly ever. Deep water will not help you because plant will be able to drink a little bit of that water through capillary action, but in extreme temperatures like in my area, it's just not fast enough. So anytime you put anything in the ground, concentrate in the root ball only for the first summer at least. Once your plant gets older, we can go ahead and talk about how to water that plant correctly, because deep water will actually help plants that have tap roots or deep roots as they get older. But it will not help your little plants or plants that are not rooted in the ground until, well, they are rooted in the ground. Gardening myths. They're all over the place, and like I said, it's very hard for somebody new to gardening to identify what's real and what's not real, what's true and what's not true. So if you want to learn more about this gardening myths that I just talked about, I have several videos in my channel where I discuss each one in details. If you have your own gardening myths, or if you're wondering about a gardening myth that you're not sure if it's true or not, well, comment below and I'll make videos about it. But as always, if you like the video, don't forget to like it. If you haven't subscribed, what are you waiting for? And as always, I will see you next time.